Hey, Scott Bursick with Trophy Fish Outdoors. I wanted to revisit a video I did back in 2018, and it's done pretty well. It's got a lot of views with the small size of my channel, but I've moved from kayak fishing to fishing from a boat, and after rewatching this video, there's a lot of this that still applies, even to boat owners, and so I kind of wanted to share this, reshare this video and just add a little bit more information about it. So, in the video, I talk about trolling, and a lot of it is kayak related. Um, but the same lures still apply for the most part. I've made a few minor changes and a few minor additions, I should actually say. And my thoughts on speed have changed a little bit. So, in the video, and it'll follow here shortly. I don't want to make the video too long, but I'll talk about the hellbenders. And I still use hellbenders, but now I'm using the X wrap from Rapala, and they have several different sizes of X wraps. But the X wrap allows you to troll just a little bit faster, and it dives just as well. Do the same thing, take the hooks off, put the weight up on the front. I use braid for my main line now. I'll use 20 to 30 pound braid. Braid cuts through the water better than monofilament does because of its smaller diameter. However, it floats, so there's a little bit of a trade-off there. But also for the lures, I've added something new to my repertoire, new for me anyway. So I'd used pet spoons in the past, but they're kind of cost prohibitive because they'll run anywhere from like $8 to $12 a piece. So what I've started using now are these Sumo Spoons. These Sumo Spoons are actually from Catfish Sumo, and they're used for catching white bass and skipjack, to be used for catfish bait, because in Tennessee and a few other states you can use white bass for bait. So I find these Sumo Spoons to work really well. Another addition that I've made, or change that I've made to my trolling technique, is I will run a couple of divers down deep, but then I've also switched to more of a trolling rig that uses a weight. So it's going to be like a Carolina rig, like you'd use for any other rig. And the sliding weight, you can make that sliding weight anywhere from a quarter ounce to, an ounce or even more, depending on the depth that you want that to go in the water column. I've been experimenting with a half ounce, and about a 4 foot fluorocarbon leader with a Sumo spoon off the end. Now that rides a little higher in the water column while the divers go down deep, and I'm finding that I'm getting a lot more white bass up closer to the surface, especially in the mornings and the evenings. Later in the afternoon, I'll start getting more on the lower rigs, but even on a boat without a lot of space, that increases your rods in the water from 2 to 4, because you can put the diving ones sort of out and let those dive down deep, and then put the I put the two, with the Carolina rigs and the Sumo Spoons, I put those pretty much straight up in the air so I can see the hits on the rods, and those ride just under the surface down to probably, I don't know, 4 to 6 feet, I'm guessing. So you're covering a lot more water column, and you'll increase the number of fish that you catch dramatically. My speeds now, I generally go between probably 2.8 to 3.2 miles an hour, because the X wrap that I'm using actually takes a little bit more speed to make it go down. And you watch the tip of your rod, and you want to be able to see that rod moving as that bill's shaking back and forth. When you're using those kind of rigs, you don't always know you've got a fish on the hook, especially with a Sumo Spoon, because it's smaller and you'll get yellow bass on there sometimes. And that rod, that pulsing that you'll get from that bill shaking back and forth will stop. But that's about the only indication that you've got a fish on. So if you don't see that pulsing anymore, either it's gone too deep and it's dragging on the bottom. In that case, you're going to see some jerks. But if it goes completely still, you may have a small fish on there. So anyway, enjoy the rest of the video. I just wanted to do a re-release with some updates to it. And I'll be doing some on the water spots, trolling here pretty soon, probably within the next weekend or so. I've been concentrating mainly on catfishing, but I love to troll for white bass. Usually when I'm going to and from my catfishing spots, I'll do the trolling for the white bass. And then if I see a bunch on the graph, I'll stop and drop some slabs down. That's the other thing that I'm doing too. That same Carolina rig that I'm talking about where I'm trolling just under the surface, the cool part about that is if the fish are down deep, cast that thing out and let it sink to the bottom and just give it a bounce. Lift that weight up off the bottom, and that Sumo Spoon is really light and it flutters back down. You'll be amazed how many fish you'll catch. So you've got a rig that works for trolling as well as for popping along the bottom to pick up those fish that are underneath. So give it a try. I guarantee you're going to have success with this rig. Enjoy the video, and we'll see you out on the water.
Hey YouTube, today I wanted to do something different. I want to do sort of a how-to issue on how I troll for white bass and hybrids. Got the boat here. I'm going to go through some of the baits that I use. I'm going to go through the setup of the boat, and then just kind of talk about how I go about trolling depending on the water conditions and where the fish are located. So first things first, I'm going to talk about the rod holders that I use. So I'm using these Canon rod holders. These Canons are extremely durable. You can see they're bolted right into the side right here. This ring will slip open to allow the rod to come out, or you can just take them right out of the end. If you get a big fish on those, sometimes it can be hard to remove it from the mount, but nothing's going to take this thing out. It's made for downrigger fishing, so it's extremely durable. I've tried others that mount on the H-rail and stuff, and they just don't ever really seem to hold, but these have been solid. You can adjust them up and down. You can adjust them forward or back. I like to go straight out just a little bit forward, and try to keep the rod tips low so that my baits can go down deep. So I'm going to use these rod holders for sending baits down to the bottom. So speaking of sending baits down to the bottom, let's talk a little bit about baits. So I'm a huge fan of DOA. DOA is my #1 brand for fresh or salt water. This is what the packaging looks like, and these are some of my favorite colors that I use. Although right now, early spring, I'll tell you that this glow in the dark and this key lime is killing it. But this sparkle glow works really good too, so these also glow in the dark. Some of the jig heads that I like to use. So you can find these at various places, Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, you can get them online. I like these ones with the blades. When the fish are up shallow, gives it a little bit more flash. Typically I use between 3/8 of an ounce and 1/2 ounce. And then I also use some that don't have the blades, just for trolling shallow water, or if I'm fishing near the surface, sometimes I don't use the blades. But here's the secret to fishing deep. So this is called a hell bender. This is actually a bass lure. When you buy these, they have treble hooks on them. You take the treble hooks off. You bend this lip down a little bit, just a little bit, so that it will dive deeper. And then up here in the front, you can either use a split ring or sometimes I use a snap ring. I'm going to put a weight on the front. I'm going to make that 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce, depending on how deep I want it to go. And then on the back here, there's a little swivel. I tie on my leader. Typically, I like my leaders to be 6 to 8 feet long. Any shorter than that, I don't think I get as many strikes, but this thing will dive anywhere between, well, really as shallow as you want it to go, all the way up to almost 30 feet deep if you put a 1 ounce weight on the front of this. So if the fish are really deep in the early spring, you can get to them here. So let me show you what this looks like on the rod. So this is the bait that I have. I've got a long leader attached to it here. And then you can see on this one I've got a larger weight. This is probably 3/4 of an ounce. I've bent the lip down. I've got the line tied off to the back right here. And if the fish are, like right now, in 8 to 10 feet of water, obviously you don't want this thing to go down 30 feet deep. So what I'll do is I'll let out just enough line to where I think that this thing is going down somewhere in the range of where the fish are. I may only let it out a couple of feet, because the long leader length, this jig is going to sink down some more and get down to where the fish are. This is a fairly weedless rig. The only problem that you'll have is if you set that bait up there too shallow. If you set it too shallow, it's going to dig into the mud and it can possibly catch on things. So what I like to do is I like to use a heavier line up front here, maybe 17 pound, and then use like a 12-pound leader. So that way if I get hung up, I'll probably get this back. This is a little bit expensive. I'll put the links in the video. I don't care as much if I lose the jig. So that's how I'm fishing for up in the front. Then what I'll do also is I'll use the rear rod holders back there on the Hobie, and I'll just put one of these on and just drag one of these. So sometimes I'll use up to 4 rods. I'll have 2, 1 on each rigger, and then I'll also put 2 off the back. The 2 off the back, I don't use the divers, I just use these straight, and I'll vary the color. So I may use 4 different colors on the 4 different baits. The secret to this, though, is forward boat movement. You have to have forward boat movement the entire time, because if you catch a fish and your boat starts to turn, your lines are going to get really tangled. If you catch a big fish, you may get tangled up anyway. Sometimes I'm catching catfish on these rigs. They'll tangle you up. It's just part of the game. If you feel more comfortable, go with 2. I like to keep my speed somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 to about 2.5 miles an hour. Just depends on how aggressive the fish are. If they're schooling, it'll make a difference on how fast I go. Typically, though, I keep it at 2 miles an hour. That seems to be the magic number. With these hell benders, when they're running smoothly, you should see the end of the rod move. So you should see the end of the rod moving with the bait. That way you know that it's got its action down there, it's vibrating, it's doing what it should be doing. Sometimes you'll catch small fish like yellow bass, and when those yellow bass get on there, you may not even see the fish. But if you get a bigger one, you'll see the rod shaking as the fish is striking on there. Of course, try to keep pressure on it the entire time. That forward speed really helps. You can slow it way down, but when you get a fish on there, just try to bring it in. Now, if you get into a school, you can end up in trouble real quick. One of my earlier videos, I hooked myself in the leg. That's because I had too much going on in the boat and I wasn't paying attention. So when you get over a school, mark it on your graph, come back around, run through them time and time again, because those fish will really, really attack these things. If I get into schools that are surfacing, I put these away and just go with the surface rods. Just go ahead and start casting at them. So this works all through the summer. You'll see guys out there cruising really slow up on Lake Texoma. I like to do this for stripers. There's some other things that you can put on the end. You can put on some mini baits like crankbaits or lipless crankbaits work really good back here. Pet spoons, they're these little spoons that you put on the back, but I don't like to use those because I find that those mainly catch small fish. So I'm going with the bigger bait to catch the bigger fish. And I want that bait to go fairly deep. That's why I'm using the 3/8 to ½ ounce weight. So that's really about it. Your drag, want to keep your drag kind of loose. You don't want a super tight drag. When that fish strikes it, he's really going to eat it. The hooks on these jigs are sharp. They're going to penetrate really well. So just keep your drag fairly light. It's kind of hard to see the 2 rods that are behind you when you're going to, so I've got to look back quite a bit. I may install a mirror up in the front of my boat so I can see my rear rods better. But that's about it. You have any questions, shoot me a question. Shoot me your questions down below, and please hit the subscribe button. I'd like to do more of these videos. I'd like to make them worthwhile for me and you. If there's anything else that you'd like me to do a video for, shoot me a note and let me know. I'd love to do some more how-to videos or something along those lines. So again, hit the subscribe button, smash that like, and we'll see you again. Thanks. Oh my God. That's a good one. Hybrid. That's a nice one. hybrid. Decided since I kept hooking up to flatheads on crappie jigs, I'd drop a white bass jig down there. Swim jig. And lo and behold, got a flathead. Pretty cool.